And Book TV is live at the Miami Book Fair. This is the 33rd year that the festival has been held. It's held on the campus of Miami-Dade College in north downtown Miami. We are now joined on our Book TV set by Wesley Lowery, who is the author of this book, They Can't Kill Us All, Ferguson, Baltimore, and a New Era in America's Racial Justice Movement. Mr. Lowery, where'd you get the title for this book?
So this title comes from a sign that was left at a vigil after the fatal shooting of Antonio Martin. This was one of the first fatal shootings after the grand jury decision almost 2 years ago now to not charge the officer in Ferguson. And I think one of the reasons we stuck with it was that we thought it captured the ethos and the feeling of so many of the people who had taken to the streets during these last few years, right? That there's been a shooting, and it seems like this is happening every day during certain periods, but we're all going to rush into these streets because there's power in these numbers.
Do we have any idea who left that sign?
We don't. It was one of the demonstrators. You know, that was a night that was probably a few dozen protesters. It wasn't one of the massive nights, but I remember seeing that and making a note in my notebook that day that, you know, it captured a lot of the feeling that I'd been seeing and hearing from demonstrators.
What was your experience in Ferguson?
So I got to Ferguson 2 days after Michael Brown had been killed. At the time, I was a national reporter for the Post covering politics. I was covering Congress. A very different beat. And I happened to be free. I had a bag packed. I just gotten back from a trip to cover a Senate race in Michigan. And we were having a conversation around the office about, hey, you guys see what's going on in Missouri? What's our coverage plan? I had initially offered, hey, I can call some of the congressional representatives. Maybe they'll call for a federal investigation, get a DC-ish scoop, right? And finally an editor said, well, can you go? Could you get on a plane? And so I said, sure, why not? Got on a plane, went to Ferguson, Missouri, landed on the 11th for what I thought was going to be a few day assignment, right? I thought I would tomorrow's paper, maybe get some feature story for the weekend, and then be back for Sunday football, you know, that weekend at home. Instead, I ended up staying in Ferguson, you know, almost 3 months. Almost full time. We had a Ferguson bureau there. As I was there, on the second or third day I was there, myself and another reporter were actually arrested during the coverage of the protest. And we were the first two of what would end up being dozens of reporters who at some point in time were taken into custody by police there. There was just this day after day of demonstrations. There were mass arrests, people being arrested at times indiscriminately, at times with cause. And so we were kind of caught up with that, and that created a whirlwind, and I became one of the figures of this story.
Wesley Lowery is our guest. You've heard our beginning conversation. If you would like to participate and call in, talk with him about some of the issues surrounding Ferguson, the Black Lives Matter movement, etc., and some of the racial issues that the country has faced in the last couple of years. We want to hear from you. 202 is the area code. 748-8200 if you live in the East and Central time zones. 748-8201 for those of you in the Mountain and Pacific time zones. Is this a black and white issue that we're facing, or is this a black and blue issue that we're facing?
Well, I think in some ways it's both, because I think it's a black and blue issue that is begotten by our historic black and white issue, right? You know, we know that this is a country that, as President Obama would describe it, was founded with an original sin, right? We built in racial inequity into the very fabric of our nation, right? And that's something that we've now spent hundreds of years, although some would argue we didn't spend most of those first years trying to do anything about it. We were very happy with the way we had it. But we have since spent time trying to undo that and make up for that, right? But I do think that there is because of that, there's a historic relationship between black communities and law enforcement that dates back to the days when police officers were slave catchers, right? There's always been a historic relationship. It's interesting, the former Chicago police superintendent gave a speech recently where he talked about so many of the policies, whether it be during Jim Crow, whether it be people who were leading the lynch mobs, with the people who were enforcing housing or school segregation, historically have been police officers. The police have, for all of American history, been the face of physical oppression for black and brown Americans. And so sometimes we talk about how can we rebuild the relationship, or how can we restore, when in reality we need to be talking about creating a new relationship, because there's never been a good relationship between black Americans and the police.
Wesley Lowery, Cleveland, Ferguson, Baltimore, Minneapolis, New York, Charleston. We had a black president during that time. Is that coincidental, or is there a connection?
I certainly think there's a connection. You know, I think that I think that cuts in two directions. First, you know, I do think it's coincidental in that we've seen unrest and we've seen police shootings every year of our modern history. This was going on during the Bush years. This was going on during the Clinton years. We might not have been talking about it, and we might not have covered it as a media in the same way. But these issues have always existed. But I do think that the presidency of Barack Obama activated a level of activism and political anxiety that perhaps had not existed prior to him. And I think that worked in two different ways. You know, first, in the book, I try to profile many of the young activists who come to the forefront and become the faces of the protest movement. And so many of them had their entry into politics through the election of Barack Obama. They voted in 2008 for him or 2012 for him, often for the first time. You're talking about 20-somethings, right? Many of them canvassed for him, worked. And I think very often this turn of phrase, this idea that we needed to have a black president to understand the limitations of a black presidency, right? Barack Obama was elected on this mandate to change Washington as we knew it, to bring us together. In his DNC speech, he talks about we're not a black America and a white America and a Hispanic America. In his election night speech after he's been elected, the first black president, he says we're not a collection of blue states and red states, we're a United States, right? But he was incapable himself of bridging this divide and bridging this gap. We know this, right? Our politics is as divided as it's ever been, if not more so. And I think because of that, because so many voters, especially young black people who had projected onto President Obama this hope for a different country, this hope for a different world, for a politics where outcomes and experiences would not be defined by race, then became remarkably frustrated when that prophecy was not coming true, right? That Trayvon Martin was still dead, that we were still having these conversations about race and ethnicity in colleges and in culture. We're still seeing diversity issues in our popular culture, right? And I'll never forget an activist looking at Claire McCaskill, the senator from Missouri, during a town hall, and she was encouraging the protests, encouraging the activism, but she said, what you guys need to do is you need to register to vote, you need to turn up. It's kind of what we often hear in terms of how people should politically engage. And I remember this activist looking at her and saying, I voted for Barack Obama twice and Michael Brown is still dead. This idea that just the existence of a black president could not, in fact, erase the history and the reality that we live in.
They Can't Kill Us All is the name of the book. Wesley Lowery is our guest. He's a national reporter with the Washington Post. And let's take some calls. Let's hear from Ryan in Sedona, Arizona. Hi, Ryan.
Hi, how you doing? I just got a few comments just to make. Thank you, Bud, for writing your book and for standing up for us people. But I'm a white American, and if I was black in America, I'd probably be dead. I've already been denied health care for a pre-existing condition. I've already been locked up in prison for something that is now legal. I was fired from my job because of the economy. And I've tried to be the best American I can possibly be. And now I'm suffering from other health conditions that I've also been poorly cared for in this free country that we live in. And if we just go back just 40, 50 years ago, 60 years, and white women treated poorly with black women, Indians, black Americans.
Tell you what, Ryan, I think we've got your point. Wesley Lowery, is there a larger picture that we can draw from your book and tie it into Ryan's experience?
Of course. And Ryan, I appreciate the call, and I'm sorry for what sounds like a very difficult set of circumstances. I think that we all as Americans can empathize with each other. I think that one of the things we've seen over the last 8 years on both sides of the spectrum are these large protest movements that have been born out of political frustration, right? This begins with the Tea Party following the election of Barack Obama, Occupy Wall Street then on the left, a resurgence of Republicans and the Tea Party again in 2014 as they take the Senate. And then Black Lives Matter is born, or the movement for Black Lives. And I think that speaks to, I think very often we want to set up a juxtaposition, that either you work within the system or you're working outside of the system. Why won't those protesters all go vote, right? That type of sense. And in reality, I see some democratic beauty in protest, in the act of protest, right? And in many ways, it is our original means of interacting with our government. I mean, it's what this country was founded on. And I think that it's unsurprising to me that the Obama years and the time we are in now, and likely the Trump years moving forward, have been marked by street activism and street protests, because it's a time, as the president so eloquently described while he was campaigning, a time when gridlock has suffocated Americans. People are frustrated. Why hasn't the economy been more turned around? Why, at the time, why wasn't there health care? Why? And I think that people who have voted and who feel like they have done everything right, this was many of the people in Ferguson, which is unlike what a lot of people, a place, most people living in Ferguson had made it out. They'd done everything right. And they still couldn't understand why they were either being treated this way or that they hadn't achieved what they thought was the American dream. And so I think that Ryan's call kind of fits into the ethos that we're feeling and seeing across the nation as I interview people.
Well, let's hear from Sid, who's calling in from St. Louis, very close to Ferguson. Go ahead, Sid.
I thank you for writing the book, and I have one question. In the view of the new administration and Donald Trump being famous or notorious for the Central Park issue, with not even still acknowledging that the men who were initially convicted were innocent, how do you think that they're going to deal with as an administration with the policing of minority communities and immigrants? And what do you think the community needs to do? Because I have black male children, I have white children, I have Hispanic children, I have immigrant children, all in my extended family, and I'm afraid for them. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you so much for the call, and I think that that's a really important question. It's something I've been reporting a lot about now and thinking a lot about. What we see very often after times of unrest, especially times of unrest between minority communities and police, you think about years during the 60s and years during the 50s and 40s, we very often see a law and order backlash to that. The Nixon election in '68, now arguably the Donald Trump election in 2016. The Obama administration has been very specific and aggressive in using the Department of Justice to try to address these issues. Now, most of the activists don't think they've done enough, but with that said, it's unquestionable the Obama administration has done more than any other modern presidency in terms of using the Department of Justice to investigate police departments, to attempt to provide community policing resources, and also to require information from police departments. One project I worked on was tracking police killings, how many people were being shot and killed by the police. That's data the federal government does not keep. Donald Trump, on the other hand, he has stated essentially, we don't believe that the federal government should be requiring the local departments to be reporting this data. We don't want to harass them for this. He's stated many times that he wants to restore more law and order. He said in a questionnaire to the International Association of Chiefs of Police that he wants to rebuild the relationship between the federal government and local police departments, which sounds to most observers essentially that he wants to be less critical of local police than perhaps the Obama administration has been. And so, and what we know about the potential new Attorney General Jeff Sessions, or Senator Jeff Sessions, is that he also has had certainly a law and order streak. And so it seems very unlikely that many of the steps that have been taken during the Obama years to attempt to reform local policing will be continued. And I think what that most likely means is that for people who want to see changing in local police, there's going to be a need certainly to work at a local level, because I don't know that the federal government cavalry is going to be coming in, certainly not for the next 4 years.
That report that the Washington Post did on police shootings, is that available on the website?
Yeah, yes, it is.
What would be the best place to find it? Because that was a pretty comprehensive report.
Of course. And so, the easiest way might actually be just to Google Washington Post Fatal Force, which was the name of the
Fatal Force.
Was the name of the project. It's also it's on the site, or Washington Post Police Shooting Database. Because what we've done is, and we're still working on this, we have now for 2 years in real time attempted to track fatal police shootings. And so we tracked 990 of them last year, and they're in a real-time searchable database. You can see each one. And I don't know what the number is exactly for this year so far, but we're about on pace to have the same fatal number of fatal police shootings, and that all that of it, data and information is available in real time online.
They Can't Kill Us All has a point of view. Is that difficult for you as a reporter for the Post to put your point of view in this book?
Yes and no, sometimes. I mean, I think that, I believe in transparency and honesty and fairness, right? And I think that those things are what's most important. One thing that was difficult in covering this story, or I guess I take that back, it wasn't even difficult, but one thing that was present during covering this story was that at one point I became part of it, reluctantly, and I wasn't too happy about it, but also, that I was a young black man writing very often about the deaths of young black men or old black men who looked like my father, or young black women. And I think I think that sometimes we lie to ourselves when we believe that there is some type of objective neutral that exists. As reporters, as journalists, we all bring our live experiences into the stories we cover, whether that's what stories we believe are worthy of our coverage or not, whether how hard we work to get that extra interview or how sympathetically we frame someone. And so I think it's important to be upfront and acknowledge who we are, and I think that helps us tell the stories more accurately.
From They Can't Kill Us All, between January and August 2015, 24 unarmed black people have been shot and killed by police. While black men and women make up just 12% of the nation's population, they accounted for nearly 25% of those who were being shot and killed by the police. Ken in Southfield, Michigan, you're on with Wesley Lowery, author of They Can't Kill Us All.
Mr. Lowery, I take a different view on all of this. Why are young black men constantly involved with the police in terms of police altercations? And I go back to the Rodney King affair. I remember on the 10th anniversary of the Rodney King incident, they interviewed Rodney King, and here's what he admitted. He says, well, I was on parole at the time, and I knew that my only chance was to put up a fight, which is what he did. By putting up a fight, he became the victim, whereas he was a paroled armed robber at the time of that event, and he knew he was going to go to jail unless he put up a fight. Why are there so many altercations, and why do people resist arrest out there on the street when they can settle their issues when they get back into the courtroom?
Let's hear from Wesley Lowery.
Of course, and I appreciate the question. I think that's a fair question. Something I get a lot from readers and people who write in who are reading articles, right? Why there's so much scrutiny of the police and rather less scrutiny of the criminals, right? Now first of all, I think that there is a fair point to be made about that. Obviously, I don't think that people should be necessarily resisting arrest or fighting with police officers, certainly not killing police officers. It's always a tragedy when we have an officer who's killed, and we've seen many cases of that, right? But I do think that when and it's hard to explain why people who are breaking the law break the law. But I do think that there is something to be said for a undoing of the police legitimacy in many communities. And that one of the reasons that we follow the law, when you think about our criminal justice system only can work if the majority of the people follow the law. There are far fewer police officers than there are citizens. If we all went out and decided to rob a bank tomorrow, there would not be enough police to catch us. It wouldn't happen, right? We couldn't do it. That this system only works when it's seen as legitimate, and most people see a deterrent and a reason not to do it. Now, when we look at, I think there are a lot of things that break down legitimacy in a community of law enforcement. One are historical realities. Again, the fact that there has never been a positive relationship between police and black and brown communities. I think ongoing questions, whether that be stop, question, and frisk, or other policies that many people see as discriminatory. The idea of harassment. I think additionally, I've done some reporting recently on homicide clearance rates, right? The idea that in many of these communities, when people really need the police are unable to solve their crimes. All of those things, I think, at times can contribute to a delegitimizing of police departments and of police officers that I do think likely leads to people being less likely to comply with officers. I think the other thing that's worth noting and remembering, too, is that when we analyze these incidents, right, whether it be Rodney King or Michael Brown or Sandra Bland, whichever incident you'd like to analyze, while I do think there are fair questions to be asked, I think it's our job as a media and also our job as society to hold our police officers to a different standard than we hold a paroled armed robber, right? Any action of a police officer is done in our name. So every boot to the face of Rodney King, every bullet to the back of Walter Scott was done in the name of the taxpayers. And I think we need to require a certain level of accountability and a different standard than we do someone who's breaking a law.
Ray is calling in from Kilgore, Texas. Ray, you're on Book TV with author Wesley Lowery.
Yeah, I think Mr. Lowery has a very myopic view of everything. And the problem with the Black Lives Matter movement is that there's more white people killed by police than there are black. And and y'all lump all the black people that are attacking police officers or attacking someone else and gets killed justifiably with all the others that shouldn't have gotten killed. If y'all would quit doing the racist type deal, the white people would join up with you and have a movement to help deter some of this. We've all had some policemen that have not done right and treated us wrong, but far more often the black people are resisting arrest and they're running from the police and they're fighting with the police. And
all right, Ray, I think we got the point. Wesley Lowery.
So, Ray, I really appreciate the call. I think that it's a point. That's another point I hear very often. And you're right. One thing we know from our study, the Washington Post, because, again, before we did this piece and the Guardian newspaper did a similar project, we didn't know. We literally didn't know who was being killed by the police, how often, at what rates. Yes, the majority of people shot and killed by police officers are white. But the majority of the people in the United States of America are also white. I think it's one of the reasons it's important to look at the percentage of populations, right? If black men are 6% of the population, yet 24% of the people being shot and killed by the police, it speaks to a potential disparity. But I think that I think the point you make is an interesting one, and I think people make it very often. This idea of, is this just an issue of race? Is it an issue more broadly of police use of force? Is it an issue of what role police should be playing in our society broadly? One thing I will say is that we've run the numbers. We've looked at what are the precipitating incidents of these fatal police shootings. And black men and black women are not more likely to be violent or attacking an officer when they are killed. They're no more likely than a white person. And in fact, a white person shot and killed by the police is more likely to have been armed than a black person who is shot and killed by the police, which speaks potentially to the idea of, is there an implicit bias? Are black people being viewed more sinisterly or more violent inherently than white people? And is that type of bias seeping into the use of fatal force? It's an open question. It's something that researchers are looking at and that we're continuing to look at. So thanks for the call, Ray.
They Can't Kill Us All is the name of the book. The author is Washington Post reporter Wesley Lowery. And again, the Washington Post website, if people want to see the report that they put together, they can Google or search Washington Post Fatal Force.
Fatal Force or police shooting database or police shootings. It should be the first few
results. And we're showing it to our viewers as we speak right now. Mr. Lowery, thank you for coming on Book TV.
Thanks so much for having me.
And Book TV's live coverage of the Miami Book Fair continues. We've got pretty big presence down here. We've got our Book TV set. We've got our Book TV bus. We're handing out Book TV bags. And now we're going up to the Book TV room here on Miami-Dade campus.